Okay, so going to talk about the pen tool today, and it's a weird tool that people tend to try to avoid, and it's a hard tool to work with, and I'm going to try and explain why I think it's a hard tool to work with while you guys look at this robotic arm. You know, this robotic arm is actually this is kind of the beginning of the pen tool, this type of technology. And you can see that maybe some of you have seen this kind of work before or not, but these robotic arms are really becoming super skillful at creating sculptures. So these are all computer controlled. They call them CAD, CAD CAM, computer aided design and computer aided machine. So, it's actually really cool, interesting stuff. But I kind of bring it up because you know the the pen tool, which I'm just going to just quickly click back over here real quickly, is right here. It's called the pen tool, and you it's a really useful tool. And I remember in the tools discussion, one of you mentioned it as because they like the qualities for selection, and it is a really good selecting tool. And we'll probably work on selecting maybe the 11th week because we're almost coming up on our midterm, but or not a midterm, but our spring break. But this is the pen tool, and there's a lot of tools to it. We'll talk more about them as we go, but really you kind of only need to be in the pen tool, and these all these other options are available to you. The biggest ones are convert point, delete anchor, add anchor, and then the pen tool. The freeform is kind of, in a lot of ways, not the best tool. This curvature pen tool, I just saw somebody use it for a really good reason, and so that one maybe makes sense for certain scenarios, but mostly you can use the pen tool. If you notice, though, there's a couple other shape items right here. So the text tool, so this is typing text, right? And so I think most of you will feel pretty confident with text, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but mostly you'll just use that. This tool is actually super related. This is when you're making what they should call this is the path tool, but they call it the pen tool. But what you're doing is you're creating paths when you're making a pen tool. And when we talk about path, like what I want to kind of get you to think about, we'll talk about the other shapes in a moment, but just think about that path for a moment. And what I want you to kind of start to think about is how, oops, I meant to do this. Um, why am I not showing it? Is it behind us? There it is. When this tool was going across this stuff, just think about how the head of this tool is following a path across this, and it's some of you maybe have heard of contour drawing. Just notice how the pen's just it's following along a line or the surface of this object, and it's basically removing stuff, but this tip is following a path, if you can think of it that way. Here's another example of where these are this is a software that's from Adobe that it's practicing a shape right now, and what you're seeing is the path that it would follow. Let's see if I can find it better. It's closer. So these are digital representations of a tool moving, and again, you're kind of like, why is he showing me all this stuff? This is Photoshop, right? But the idea is to show you where it comes from. I think when you learn why this tool was created or what it comes from, it makes sense why it's so hard to use. Or you just have to think about it really differently is the important thing. So these tools here are following paths, right? Just notice how the tip of this thing is following along a path. And if you were to think of this as a drawing, you could almost see this as a drawing, right? Like it kind of makes sense that what it's doing a little bit. Here's that actually. Those green lines all represent a path that the tool was following. Okay, and so the reason why I bring it up is let's talk about it. You'll hear this guy's name brought up a lot. Is Pierre or Bizier? I'm going to say that totally wrong. And he's the one that actually made this really famous. And you'll hear this word a lot when you're referring to curves. A Bezier curve. Now you'd think he's a mathematician, but he wasn't. He was actually working for a car company called Renault. The actual mathematician is this guy, and he did win a lot of awards. And if you look him up, you'll see he did win. Whatever. Um, doesn't totally make anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. But the Bezier was really he was really involved in the whole idea of how to take this math and have it make sense. I think this is a really neat graphic of it. So what I'm about to show you is a bunch of math, and that might throw a lot of people off with the whole math thing. And you really don't need to know math to use this tool at all. It's totally it's intuitive to use the tool, and I think that's partly what's really kind of cool about it. But the other thing is just to recognize is that when people first started using computers, they were, it was car companies. They were like, well, how can we take this tool and make it usable, right? And one of the things that people were really trying to do was figure out how to get uh, milling machines and machines to work using this new thing called a computer, right? And that's what this guy is really famous for, is working for this company Renault, which was they made cars, right? And the vehicle, I think, did I find it? Yeah, here it is, right here. Believe this is the car that was designed using this curve system. You can see all the curves on this car. Again, this is like, I think it's helpful to know why this is so hard to use and why people tend to kind of move away from this tool and not use it, because it's mathematical in its nature. Another way to think of this, and I didn't bring it up, but is a dot to dot image, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But you know, this is the vehicle that was created. This is the tool that you're using. So originally, this tool was created for computers and machines, not for graphic design and that sort of thing. It was later when people were like, "Hey, we could actually use this to make a PostScript, right? And we could use this to actually do things like Adobe Illustrator or Corel Draw, right? Like these softwares are like, hey, you could make letters and drawings with this, or shapes, not just cars, bodies, parts, but actually images as well. And that's when people really started to move into vector graphics. And so you can see in the beginning of my class, I was like, hey, vector graphics, you got to make sure the image, the software you pick is not vector graphic, that it is image based, right? It's raster. So this is the difference. This is vector graphics. And so vector graphics have a whole different quality to them than rasters. So it's a long conversation, and probably for a lot of you, it's going to take time to get used to this. But for me as an animator, this is one of the reasons why this class is a big class, is if you can understand how to use a pen tool, animation is going to make a little more sense to you. A lot of things are going to make a lot more sense to you on a computer, because a lot of times this is the kind of work you're doing with a computer. Think of it this way too, like another way to think of this is, if you think about P0 and P2 right here, think of those as positions in space, or known qualities. Like you have P0, you have P2. Well, let's just say P1 as well. If you know all those qualities, then and let's just say you tell the computer, I know this place, I know this place, I know this place. What the computer is going to figure out is where this red line should go. And so the computer is actually figuring something out for you, and that's the key. That's the key to all of this, is that the computer's figuring out something for you. You're not defining that necessarily that curve. You're just defining points in space. It does everything else in between. And I'm using the word key and in between right now, and those are Walt Disney, the animator Walt Disney, Snow White, and those sorts of things, right? Mickey Mouse. Those are all terms that he created. Key and in between. So what happens between a keyframe and what happens in between a keyframe is a big deal, right? And so this, in a lot of ways, is how animation works. In fact, actually, this is how animation works. So let me zoom out here. I'm kind of zoomed way in. I had a couple other things that I was going to show to you. Like this is the Bezier curve. It's pretty crazy when you go down. It's a lot of math. I can see a lot of people panicking with that kind of stuff. Um, you know, you don't need to know this. You don't need to know that math to have this stuff work. It's definitely doable without this math, right? But it can be like, just notice that there's a lot of math going on. And so when you're using this tool, recognize that, what's happening is complicated. It isn't, it's like straightforward, okay? It is a little bit difficult, okay? Um, but it's definitely doable and it's intuitive when we work with it in our applications, okay? We don't have to think mathematically when we do it. But I think it is helpful to recognize that this math is happening. And I think these are really cool examples of how it actually works. This is more describing how the math works a little bit more than actually the process of using the tool. Another word you could look up here is interpolation. Another thing you can think of when you're looking at these is just notice that P0, P1, P2, P3, P4, do you notice how they're in order? So order is really important. And I was just about to say, another way to look at this would be dot to dot printables, right? Let's do that. That would be a good one. So I'm sure some of you have seen these, right? I think you probably recognize right away that's probably a unicorn, right? Kind of a small image for that, but this is a teddy bear, and you can see that it starts here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and what's important to a dot image is the numbers, right? If you don't, if I were to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I were just to go to those dots in any order, it wouldn't look like a bear. It would look like a bunch of lines going all over the place, right? Same as this train. Like if I were to go around in the wrong order, it wouldn't look like a train. It would look like something else, right? I don't even know what that thing is, but that would be kind of cool. That's a pretty crazy dot to dot there. Look at that one. If you don't know which one to go to first, you're gonna make a total mess of that thing, right? So the following the numbers in the right order is what's going to create this object. It kind of looks like a horse. Do you see a horse there? I kind of think it might be a horse or something. Guessing there. So when we're talking about this stuff, order is important too. Okay, and that's partly how it works. So, Pikachu, nice. So that's kind of an introduction to the tool, and we'll stop there. That's introduction. Now I'm going to move into Photoshop.